Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. Ukraine is facing a shortage of PAC-3 missiles for its Patriot air defense systems and is proposing to exchange domestically produced interceptor drones with Middle Eastern countries. In return, President Zelensky said. Now, the proposal comes amid escalating conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran, raising concerns about global air defense supplies. At the same time, Russia's war against Ukraine continues, with ongoing drone attacks and mounting pressure on Kyiv's air defenses. And now to break down the latest developments, we're joined by Ronald T., affiliate lecturer at the Defense Studies Department, King's College London. Good to have you on TVP World. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sasha. Thank you for inviting me. Good to be here.
So let's begin with this latest. I mean, you have quite a background also in military logistics and history. Looking at this comment from President Zelensky, let's say, how dire is the situation for him? Is this, let's say, a realistic trade he's offering? How do you think this is going to go down?
Okay, so first you've said how realistic is the request. I can't comment on whether or not the Middle Eastern countries will actually donate air defense systems to them. These are expensive systems. This reflects a general lack of resilience in air defense systems. What do I mean by that? The missiles are actually a very exquisite supply chain. So you don't just make them from a single supplier. There are many different suppliers. And the production of them doesn't really match the use of them. So, for instance, in the Gulf, when the Houthis were attacking U.S. ships, the U.S. fired off about 2 years of supplies of SM-3 missiles, I think within the space of a couple of days. So I can't really comment on how the Gulf states will react to President Zelensky's request. But I can reinforce that these, again, are exquisite supply chains. And I think on first principles, the Gulf states are probably going to shepherd their own resources. The second part of your question was, sorry, Sasha, say again.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how realistic this will be as it's credible, but let's say urgently is this need? I mean, we know that Ukraine needs as many Patriot batteries and as many missiles as it can get its hands on. So I'm just wondering, is this now more of a, let's say, another political decision, the impact of all this going forward?
Yes, it is another political decision, given that the United States has now stopped 99% of its shipments to Ukraine directly. It is actually getting the European nations to buy the munitions from America. I just want to add, Patriot missile batteries are only part of the total air defense system because Russia uses a number of drones, both medium and long range, as well as medium ballistic missiles. So the Ukrainians have put together a very integrated air and missile defense system that includes rapid-fire systems, i.e. machine guns and rapid-fire weapons at low altitude, to electronic jamming, to Patriot missile batteries, and also there are also these THAAD batteries, which are a theatre high-altitude air defense system, which the Ukrainians don't have, which the Gulf states do have. So the THAAD battery, I think Saudi Arabia has 2, and UAE has 1, but each THAAD battery is $13 million. I don't see Saudis or Gulf states giving these THAAD batteries to Ukraine anytime soon. So just to underscore the fact that Patriot batteries are just part of the total air defense system. And, they would need to, obviously, if they got Patriot batteries from anywhere else, they also do need to look at other aspects of the defense. So Patriot batteries are only part of the total integrated picture.
Let's look at the wider picture then as well. Looking at the front line, and we've had General Syrski of Ukraine also comment that the Shahed drones being used by Russia are now flying much lower altitudes, under 100 meters. That makes them harder to detect by radar. Give us your assessment also on the wider front line right now. What's the situation in Ukraine? What's still needed? Is Russia still making those tiny gains? Is Ukraine holding? Give us your take.
Yeah, my take on the front is it's actually a war of attrition. So 4 years down the track, the Russian army is not the army that crossed the border in February 2022. So, for one thing, they have almost exhausted their supply of armoured vehicles. In fact, one tank type, the T-80, is probably non-existent. They've probably run out of those completely. So the Russian army is now an army that cannot execute combined arms operations. And by combined arms operations, I'm talking about the stuff your viewers would know in their minds about campaigns like Gulf War II, where there were actually integrated land and air attacks. The Russians now cannot do that. They virtually have no tactical communications. And by tactical communications, I mean the sorts of communications you need to coordinate attacks on the ground. As your news report stated a few minutes before I came on air, Starlink has now been shut to the Russians, and the Russian Telecoms Authority has also started to shut down Telegram, which is the system done by this Russian billionaire now in the UAE. I forgot his name now, Durov, I think. And Russian units have actually been using this open source technology to communicate. That is now being slowed down significantly. So the Russian government has opted for state control of information over the actual tactical usefulness of Telegram, and they're trying to get Russians especially to sign up to MUX, which actually has some surveillance features in it. What's actually happening on the front, I guess, would be described as infantry-style attacks, or so-called meat attacks, where small groups of infantry soldiers are pushed forward, preceded by drone strikes, electronic warfare and artillery, and they're just basically sent into the teeth of Ukrainian fire in piecemeal attacks just to take small pieces of ground. And when they take those small pieces of ground and perhaps get isolated, they're then getting resupplied by drones. There is no moving back. We've seen videos of people, soldiers, coming back from the front getting tortured or punished. I think up to 50,000 Russian soldiers have deserted in the last 6 months, let's say. Mm-hmm. So the front is actually just degenerated into a war of attrition. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. On that note as well, from the front as well, I liked what you said, or rather it was interesting what you said at the beginning, these exquisite supply chains. I mean, that as well makes it sound very precarious at the same time. Just tying it back from the front for the missiles and the arsenal that Ukraine needs, if this Middle East conflict continues. I mean, Donald Trump has said that munition supplies are unlimited. Those are his words. How long would it take for those supplies then from the United States coming to Ukraine to be impacted? Any delays? How long would that take if this does go on longer?
Well, as I say, with respect to President Trump, he's not a logistician. These supplies are not unlimited. And the actual figures for production and for stocks are quite closely guarded. In fact, they're classified information. We do know that this current stock of SM-3 missiles, which is the very standard missile to intercept hypersonic Russian medium ballistic range missiles, in 2023 was 400. And with Tomahawk land attack missiles in 2020, the US they had about 4,000 on their stocks, and they probably produced about 250 in 5 years. In 2023, the US Navy used 2,900 Tomahawk land attack missiles. So that's a few figures there. But what this adds up to is that this supply of missiles is not inexhaustible. They are exquisite supply chains because they rely on a lot of smaller manufacturers, and in some cases, a single or two manufacturers in America to make certain components of rocket motors. So they're actually quite sensitive supply chains and difficult to ramp up. So this is the issue with these. The US is going to prioritize its own stockpile of these weapons, and the US has to keep a sufficient number of these weapons handy or available should there be a conflict in the Indo-Pacific. So this is the other consideration. It's been estimated that a US carrier strike group has fired off its entire complement of missiles in 2 days. So some estimates say that in a hot war between the USA and, let's say, the People's Republic of China, hypothetically speaking, all those missile supplies could be exhausted in 4 to 5 days. So the other consideration that the US has to take into account is that they need to keep these missiles for the conflict in the Indo-Pacific.
And I just want to tie it to one quick still question. I'm curious, you said the president is not a logistics expert. You are. You've written about this extensively, military logistics. So I'm just wondering, briefly follow up on that. With the United States so very much focused on the Middle East, I mean, all the apparatus, America has a vast network of its military, but nevertheless, those supplies, the structures, bringing everything into Europe, bringing everything to Ukraine, can they really do both at the same time? How long can that go for? And just really quickly, how can Europe step into this, if at all, ramp up production? I know we've been talking about that before, but is there anything that Europe can do to, say, ease all this anyway?
Okay, that's two parts of the question. The US will preserve its missile and its munition stocks in Asia. So that's the big question facing US defense planners is what do we do with a two-front war? There's only now a one-front war, and let's call it a war functionally, although war hasn't been declared as such. So this has occupied the minds of US defense planners. What happens if something happens in the Middle East and in the Indo-Pacific, including South Korea? What can Europe do about it? Europe is not the producer of these Patriot and THAAD batteries. Europe could possibly provide certain elements of air defense, and I noticed that the US has moved an air defense destroyer to Cyprus. But in fact, Europe is somewhat constrained by their supplies, if you like, or their lack of logistics, their lack of strategic airlift, and their lack of things like air defense batteries, for which they're very reliant on the US. So, without actually being a specialist in air defense myself, I would say that Europe's options compared to the US are probably somewhat limited, and I really wouldn't want to go into any more detail than that.
All right. Well, look, really appreciate all that you have told us today. Very insightful. Thanks so much. That was Ronald T. there from King's College London. Thanks for your time today.
Yeah. Thank you, Sasha. Thank you, TVP.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.